Hello, Mary.
Hello, Katie. How are you?
It's really nice to be here again for another Katy and Mary Presents. Thank you so much for joining us. Um,
Thank you.
for people who've just joined us and don't know who we are, I'm a British songwriter with Polish roots, and I've written 50 songs about the Second World War experience. And I'll let you introduce yourself, Mary.
And I'm Mary Skinner. I'm a filmmaker here in New York. And my biggest film was a film about a Polish heroine, Irena Sendler, who organized a rescue of Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto during World War II.
This
And it,
particular episode that we're doing, I'd like to introduce it. It's a special. And I'll let you, Mary, introduce it.
well, the last episode we began a series where we're talking about some of the other women that were involved in with Irena Sendler in this organized underground operation to rescue Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto. And I found that I was working on the film, I discovered all these other stories that were just fascinating. And for me in particular, because my mother was Polish and my grandmother may well have been part of one of these underground conspiracies, I found that I couldn't get enough of them. These women were such role models for me. And I found that they kind of fell out into different categories. So one obviously was Irena Sendler and the social workers, the social activists. Another category, though, were these fierce, angry teenagers who were finding that they had been left and that their future had been taken away from them, and they were just furious at Hitler, and they wanted very much to be part of any kind of underground operation. Then there was another category, which was women of faith, and you'll hear more about that in another episode. But the category that we're talking about today were the artists, and there were more than one of these women that I interviewed who spent time um, with me and who had been part of Irena Sundler's operation, who had these fantastic artistic backgrounds.
So, who are you going to be speaking about today, and where's this lady come from?
Well, the lady I want to talk about today, her name was Jadwiga Petrovska, and she was very close friends with Irena Sendler, and she ran a halfway house in an area of Warsaw that was sort of a libertarian neighborhood where lots of assimilated Jews lived who were doctors and lawyers and professionals. It was like the professional, sort of independent thinking neighborhood. But when the Germans invaded, they put up a camp right across the street from her house. But still, her house was this care center. So as children were coming out of the ghetto, they came to her house, and she and her daughter took care of them and acclimated them to life outside the ghetto because they were obviously really traumatized. And she happened to work for the head of Warsaw's social services department, just as Irena Sundler did. And after a while, they were running out of places for these kids to stay. So they wanted to get them out of the ghetto, out of the Warsaw, because it was very dangerous. And she enlisted the help of her boss, this man, Jan Dobroshinsky, who actually had all these connections to all of the convents and religious organizations and orphanages all over Poland. And he just put out, a special decree to all of them that uh, they were to save these Jewish children. So many of these children survived because they were in these care centers.
And she came from Krakow, didn't she, originally? And then she found herself in Warsaw through marriage. Could you tell us a little bit about her background? She had a very artistic background, and some say that she was a magician. Maybe you could let talk a little bit about that, and how that helped her in the Second World War.
Oh, I love that question because she did come from Krakow, but Krakow was the part of Poland that was under the Austro-Hungarian Empire dominion before the First World War. So people from Krakow often spoke German. So she did speak German, just like another woman that we talked about, Magda, last episode. And she had come from this very patriotic family, very Polish Catholic patriotic family, but they were a long line of artists. So she was an artist. She had gone to art school. Her mother was an artist. Her daughter became an artist. Her granddaughter became an artist. Her great granddaughter was an artist. So they had this artistic sensibility. And so, what I find really fascinating is that this artistic sensibility sort of entered into the way they were in life. Everything was a work of art, everything was a divine expression of something beautiful, from the way they set the table to how they managed to work around a German officer who was in the way. So she could work magic, and that's why I call her kind of a magician. She could take a Jewish child on a tram and a train to a convent way outside of Warsaw and enlist German officers to help her take care of the baby. And they would have no idea that the child was Jewish or
How,
what she was up to.
yeah, it must have been so terrifying for the Jewish mothers to let their children go. How did she manage to how did she do it? How did she get the children safely um, to the safe houses and out of Warsaw to the convents?
Well, it's a good question because before the war, she had been doing a variety of things, but like a lot of women from her generation, um, did uh, did social work and charity work, meaning they opened up their homes for the care of orphans. So her home was a care center for anyone who was in trouble in the interwar period, and mostly she was taking care of Polish children who had been orphaned because there were quite a few Polish orphans in that interwar period. Also, she had very close relationships with a lot of people in the Jewish quarter of Warsaw because they were her fellow artists, and she worked in the theater and made costumes for the theater. So she used to go to those shops and buy from those ladies. So when the war began, the first thing she was doing was protecting Jewish adults who would come to her and say, "We've gotten out of the ghetto. We want to go underground. We need to get false papers. And can we stay a couple of nights here?" So her house was always full of people. She had several floors and she had made all these little rooms for people. But she was also in a neighborhood where a lot of other homes in this neighborhood were protecting Jewish people who had escaped from the ghetto and were going underground. So in the process, she found one thing led to another, and someone would tell her a mother is in trouble. She it looks like she's going to get deported, or she was deported and the child was left with a neighbor or an aunt, and can you help the child? And so one thing led to another, and she got very active in taking care of the Jewish children and finding places for them. And Irena Sendler saw, what she was doing, and the fact that she was entertaining the idea of getting Dobroshinsky to help them.
So we've heard a little bit about how she was working and hiding and helping to save the children. So what was so special about her activities? What made her such a special person in the Second World War?
Because she was a kind of a woman like a lot of other women who during that interwar period they'd had struggled through a lot, and uh, they were devout Catholics, and sort of they believed that they were in God's hands, and so this kind of gave them a courage. It allowed them uh, to risk everything. Also, they believed they were also very patriotic, and so the cause for them, um, whether they be orphaned Polish children or orphaned Jewish children, they were Polish citizens, and
Mm.
they were to be saved. They were to be helped. So there was a determination behind doing that. And this gave her a kind of courage. Plus, she was very imaginative and she liked changing clothes and putting on disguises and going in one door of her house dressed in one way and then coming out with a Jewish adult that they had been protecting, dressed another way. She liked going on trams and speaking German to the German soldiers so that they wouldn't suspect what she was up to. She liked to see how fast she could do things, and she liked to do things artfully, and she just was enjoying herself. And she
Well,
liked having
it
a house
was
full of
it
people.
must have been
Yeah.
quite, and sorry to disturb you, but it must have been so scary because so many people were being shot in the street during the German occupation of Warsaw. It was a terrifying place to live, and so actually enjoying helping to save children, but doing it absolutely in a very, very risky way. If she was caught, she was immediately shot dead. How did she manage to use her talents as an artist to get through that? It's fascinating to think that an artist could maneuver herself around this really terrifying time, because I think a lot of people don't actually know the intensity of the German occupation of Warsaw and of Poland. And every single house and every single street in Warsaw has a memorial where Poles were shot dead, Polish people of Jewish origin were shot dead. I mean, the Germans were slaughtering and shooting people on the spot. So it was a terrifying thing to do.
Well, I think that fearlessness that she had naturally, and that sort of carefree attitude, and that feeling that she was in God's hands, and that feeling that if her life was over, so be it, gave her this kind of calm whenever she was in these risky situations, and she could think fast about how to operate. So one time the Germans surrounded the house and they were getting ready to do a raid, and she had um, paper lists of all of the children that she was protecting and their original identities. And she was holding it over the stove, getting it ready to bury it, getting ready to burn it. And fortunately, the Germans went in the back, but they didn't come into the kitchen area and they left the house alone for whatever reasons. They were looking for somebody else. And so that gave her the idea that from now on she was going to fold up these papers and put them in a soda bottle and then bury them in the backyard under her apple tree. And so she shared that idea with Irena Sendler. But the sort of ingenuity that she had, because she would just become very calm in these situations, and she would come up with some kind of an artful solution.
Mm. It's interesting that you hear this a lot in Central European history. During the Second World War, I was talking to some Ukrainian people and talking about their grandparents during the Second World War. A lot of people buried things either in their gardens or they were hiding things. So goodness knows what's buried in Poland that hasn't been discovered. But it is fascinating that the ground is somewhere where people felt that the things could be safe, the money, the the goods or the photograph albums, and people would come and dig them up after the Second World War and find them. It's ingenuity and artistic creativity that got her through, though. Do you have any other examples of what she did that was so
Well, that's a
creative?
very good example because they did, in fact, they had they all the whole family was in this house, extended family, sister, grandfather, but they had to flee during the Warsaw Uprising. They were sort of fighting and hiding out during the Warsaw Uprising. And afterwards, they went back to that house, and it was sort of smoldering because the Germans had burned house after house after house, block after block after block. But there was enough of it left that they could go in the backyard and start digging. And she had not only buried those soda bottles, but she had also buried um, family heirlooms like the silver and the china, but unfortunately, it had been looted, and so all the stuff was gone, and they couldn't find anything. But still, they stayed in that house and rebuilt it. And one of the things that I love about them, about this whole family, is that uh, they the they rebuilt their home with this artistry that would be that it would preserve all the wonderful things that had happened there during the war, all the people they had protected. So the Jadwiga Petrovska's daughter, Anna, was married to a famous Polish artist, and they created these wonderful faux murals with secret um, staircases up to hidden rooms in memory of those children that they were hiding. And uh, uh, they, whenever you go to visit with them, they make these amazing decorative displays with all the trappings of things they've saved over the years. Not these are not treasures in the sense of they're not valuable, but the way they hold on to photographs and silverware and pieces of jewelry left over from that time. And then they create these wonderful displays with flowers. They're just the most artful family you could ever encounter. And the front of their house was all shot up with bullet holes from the Warsaw Uprising. But instead of covering up those bullet holes with plaster, they created sort of a sculpture around each bullet hole to so that it would be a memory of the fighting and the courage of those snipers and uh, who were shooting
Mm.
during the Warsaw Uprising.
Yeah, I mean,
It's just really marvelous.
we can look quite retrospectively now and think about their bravery, but actually to be in that was a pretty terrifying thing. But I think the adrenaline of war and her charming artistic creativity definitely allowed her to to build a network of friends that from before the war, the interwar period, and her artistic creativity that helped her get through. I mean, she is an inspiration for anybody from the art world, really, isn't she? And I think holds, as we've been talking about in previous episodes, the hospitality of Poland. Because when you visited the house, you were made to feel very welcome, weren't you? That they were very, that the family were very welcoming to you. And um, the house is actually in Filtre, in Warsaw. It's in the area of Filtre, which is near Mokotów. It's on Ulica Lekarska. So you had a wonderful time in their house, didn't you?
Fantastic. I went there more than once, and I also went to their studio. Um, uh, it, you know, for that area was taken over, but it was a lot of those apartments were only allowed to be lived in by um, Volksdeutsch during the
Mm,
war. But for somehow that's another thing that I think she did. She figured out a way to stay in her home during that time, and I think it's because she. I heard more than once that on one more than one occasion she was in a life or death situation and she just talked her way out of it. She
amazing.
had the ability to do that.
Yeah, I mean, for everybody else, I don't know many people outside Poland know this, but the Germans would just come to your house, and either you were going to leave your house or you were shot inside your house. You didn't have much of a chance. And other times, people would just the Germans would just turn up, shoot you, steal the house, or put you in a concentration camp just because they needed your house. So how she got out of that just shows her ingenuity, and
Well, yeah, part of the German strategy when they took over Warsaw is that they forced a lot of the civil servants and municipal departments to work for them.
Mm,
So they didn't want to give up, control of infectious diseases or street sweepers or, they wanted all of those activities to continue going on, garbage collection
mm,
and electrical repairs, all of those services which had formerly been part of the Polish municipal government. So they forced all those people to work for them.
mm.
And one of the departments that was forced to work for them was the Department of Social Services.
And this
And
is
that
how
was the
they
department.
Yeah, and this is how these women like that manage to swerve around the system, and it's remarkable because, as we know, if you were found in Poland, the only country ever in the World War II to be hiding a Jew, you were shot immediately on the spot. It wasn't the same for any other country. but it was in this case. And for them to actually
Right.
risk their lives to
And
do that, it's amazing.
it speaks to also, this was a municipal department, and there were a lot of people within Warsaw who remained employed by the Germans,
Mm,
under Polish bosses, because that's the way the Germans liked it,
mm.
right? But for none of these social workers to tell on each other was pretty amazing.
No, and
That these.
I mean, it's just we could speak for hours about this. We've got to wrap it up. But is there any lasting impression you'd like to leave about Jadwiga? I mean, she's a wonderful, wonderful character, isn't she?
Oh, she just reminds me that when times get tough, uh, go to your imagination. Don't forget beauty and don't forget love. And, you know, um, there was a lot of love, even in that horrifying situation. There was still love.
And on that note, we're going to come to an amazing um, female freedom fighter. So we have Jadwiga Petrovska, who Mary's been talking about, and we've got so much to say about her. We could probably do a massive series on her. Um, but this lady is called Christina Scarbeck, otherwise known as Christine Granville. She actually was a freedom fighter during the Second World War, and was the first female agent of the British Special Operations Executive, this SOE, and became Churchill's favourite spy. A beautiful woman and Miss Polonia in 1930, believe it or not. Superb horsewoman, had Jewish ancestry as well. She was half Schlachter, which opposed nobility, and half Jewish. So she was quite an interesting cultural and DNA
Isn't this
mix.
an anniversary for her? Or
Um,
is it a birthday or I think it's an
Actually, it's her
anniversary.
death anniversary, 2022. She was
Yeah.
52. She was murdered at the end of the Second World War. Um, and she took special missions. She was doing incredible missions of bravery during the Second World War, and managed underground resistance sections. She even had the Polish Highlander army working for her as couriers, and used to ski with them for 50 kilometres in really dangerous conditions. So I think she's quite an incredible person. She was the
Very
inspiration.
bold. Very, very bold.
I know.
Yeah.
And she was the inspiration for Vesper Lind, Ian
Mhm.
Fleming's book of 007 Casino Royale. If anybody has seen that film, probably see that's the inspiration taken from Christina Scarbeck. And she also had the Quadagur, and yeah, she was an OBE when she passed away, and she had prolific wartime achievements. My lovely artist drew a picture of her,
Oh,
Christina
beautiful.
Scarbeck, yeah, and here are the lyrics. I'm going to sing this song, I'm going to attempt to sing. Should be on piano, but I'm going to do it on ukulele today. Um, and this is
Fantastic.
Christine the Great. Christine the Great. I can't say much more than that. Christine the Great. I can't say much more. And she took my heart, took my heart, took my heart, took my heart, took my heart away. And she took my heart, took my heart, took my heart, took my heart, took my heart away. Christine the Great. I can't say much more than that. Christine the Great. I can't much more. A diamond, diamond girl, diamond girl, diamond girl. A diamond, diamond girl, diamond girl, diamond girl. And I saw her by the swimming pool, by the swimming pool, by the swimming pool in Cairo. And she said hello. Oh, her pretty laughter, oh, her pretty face, oh, her pretty, pretty smile. And her smile, and her smile, and her smile, and her smile. And those dark eyes, a British soldier couldn't take his eyes off her. British soldier couldn't take his eyes off of her, eyes off of her. Christine, Christine the Great. I can't say much more than heard. Christine, Christine the Great. I can't say much more. Never let her go, 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 never let her go. Take her hand and love her. La 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 la, love her. La 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 la. Christine, Christine the Great. I can't say much more than that. Christine, Christine the Great. I can't say much more. It's a little song inspired by Christine.
Yeah, she's quite an amazing woman, quite
Yeah,
amazing.
a really amazing woman, amazing. Um, very interesting life.
Yeah,
Very,
very
very.
beautiful.
Mm.
Mm.
She's actually buried in London, and if anyone wants to see her, I'm happy to place where she's buried. If you want to put flowers on her grave, but
Mm.
she's definitely worth a visit and have a look about that. So I'm just going to introduce you to somebody here. I think somebody needs to say something. Do you not think?
Our friend. There he is. Oh. He's on the way to the border with lots of goodies. Slava Ukraine. Wonderful. Wonderful. We're still thinking of you, our Ukrainian friends
Yes.
and families.
Because all of this right now that we're talking about is retrospective, but it's actually happening now in Ukraine. And the reason why we're doing these talks is to raise awareness of how we, from the Polish community, feel very much connected with this topic right now. And
Mm.
there's so much to talk about, especially with Jadwiga. She is such an amazing creative soul, isn't she, Mary? I mean, you could have talked for hours about her, and we only gave a glimpse, really, didn't we?
Yeah, I hope to write something more and we'll keep you posted. Uh, I have lots of beautiful photographs as well. So,
Yes, and Mary is an amazing fountain of knowledge about this particular topic. And as we mentioned before, it's not just by coincidence. Sorry, he just keeps wanting to come towards the screen.
Paddington, thank you. Thank you so much. Slava Ukraine.
Yes, Slava Ukrainia. And this is, yeah, he's always sporting his I Love Poland badge here, um, because he's got his little Polish wellies on. There you go. And obviously his yellow hat. And the reason why we have Paddington isn't a coincidence, is it, Mary?
No, because uh, because our fearless leader Zelensky, the wonderful president of Ukraine, was the voice of Paddington in a former life. So Paddington is very special, and and we want Ukraine to be free for Paddington.
Paddington. The original Paddington was actually this is a vintage Paddington, by the way. This is from Gabrielle Designs in Britain, and
Oh,
the original Paddington was inspired by the Kindertransport, the transport of children, Jewish children, evacuated from
yeah.
the Central European countries, who arrived in London, and the author of the book wrote that Paddington inspired by the little refugees, which is why his coat is all so much bigger than him, and his hat is bigger because nothing quite fits, and he has a little suitcase as
Oh,
well. So it's a really
yeah.
fitting. He's a really fitting bear for these times. He's a really fitting character.
Very fitting. Very fitting.
I think Jadwiga would like him very much, wouldn't she?
Very much. This was the kind of thing they did. She had her daughter, they had a whole routine that they did with the children. And one of the things that her daughter did was to read them stories from a children's book that was in Yiddish, actually. But she gave it to them to um, see the pictures. And because they were so traumatized, these children, as they came out of the ghetto, and they needed to be calmed down, and that was her whole principle, was that first they need to be calmed down and cared for before they're moved again. They've already gone through so much.
So they had that it wasn't just on the outside, but actually she was healing their souls and healing their hearts from having to leave their mummies. It must have been such a tragic moment to be taken away from their mums. Their mums must have actually had to make that horrific decision to just allow their children to live no matter what. And so the responsibility that Jadwiga and these ladies had was huge to make sure that the children knew where they came from. And it was terrifying because if the Germans, or if any German soldier or SS man or whatever, found the children didn't have the Catholic customs, they could immediately shoot the saver, and the child in 1 second. And
Mm.
these things did happen. Some of the women who were saving the Jewish children didn't make it. They were shot on the spot with the child. And my grandmother actually witnessed a child being thrown onto a bonfire alive. So it was a horrific war. And we are in a way celebrating the artistry of it, but actually every moment was life or death for these people. And for saving children and making sure that those children remembered where they came from as well. How do you explain to a 5-year-old child, it's just it's so loaded with responsibility that they may never see their mummy and daddy again. It's horrible. It's just absolutely terrifying. Um, and so many children from Poland were stolen by the Germans, weren't they? Like hundreds of thousands of Polish children, not even of Jewish blood, was stolen by the Germans, and 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 integrated into German society just because they had blonde hair and blue eyes.
Stolen and orphaned. So many children were orphaned
Yeah,
too. That's many of those teenagers that were working with Irena Sendler, actually they had lost their parents, and one of the principles of Irena Sendler's approach to social work is that if there are young people who are left in that way, you must get to them and you must make them feel important and you must give them a job to do so that they know that they matter, and a group of people that are studying alongside them so that they know that they matter. They were very sophisticated in the way they practiced all of these things.
I know.
Yeah.
So we're sending our love to everyone. We're going to have to wrap up now, I'm afraid, till our next meeting, Mary. We're going to miss you, Paddington and me. We miss you already. So we're looking forward to seeing you on our next um, meeting. Um, So thank you
Yes.
so much for this wonderful meeting,
More
and
songs
see you on the next
and
episode
more thought.
of what is it again, Mary? Just let everybody know.
Katy and Mary
Pres-
presents,
Irena
yeah,
Sendler.
Women of Faith,
Yes,
Mighty
yes.
Girls.
Mighty
Yeah,
girls. Stay safe, everybody.
Mighty
Slava
Girls.
Ukrainia, and
Yeah,
we pray for freedom of Ukraine. Brave, brave people fighting not just for the freedom of Ukraine, but the freedom of what we know as the world we have right now. Thanks very much for listening.
yeah.
Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
Paddington.
Bye. Bye. Bye.